thank you very much for joining us today for a very short webinar on the introduction to forest kindergarten. So thank you very much. What I'd like to just let you know that should you miss anything or volume doesn't work or something happens, you're going to get a recording immediately of this. So hopefully that'll help. So one of the things we'd like to do is just introduce ourselves. So I'm Marina Robb, and I run a community interest company called Circle of Life Rediscovery. And we essentially work with groups in the outdoors, whether that's training or direct facilitation. And I used to be a primary school teacher and really just have a passion for making nature accessible to as many people of different ages as possible. So that's kind of my very short background. And just over to Louise.
Hi, my name's Louise Hack. I have been an early years teacher for about 21 years now, quite a long time. And I now work alongside Marina, delivering some of the forest kindergarten training, but also I work with quite a lot of families now around sensory play experiences, whether it's inside or outside.
Thank you. Now, we like to begin our kind of webinars with a little bit of gratitude. It's very short, and mine is actually grateful to have a garden. I'm actually really grateful that I have a garden. That's my gratitude. Over to you, Louise.
I'm really grateful today for my allotment because I'm starting to really feel the benefits of all the hard work that I've put in. Finally.
If I could give you courgettes, I would.
I've got a lot of courgettes.
Okay, so thanks again. So our intention is to just talk briefly about the forest kindergarten model that we've been working on and are ready to share with you. So we all understand that this time has been a strange time, but alongside that, a lot more people have been appreciating nature. So we really think we are at an interesting point culturally as well, where people are more accepting that nature offers us so much in terms of learning and development and well-being. So with that in mind, we're going to start a slide. So here we go, hoping you can see it. Right. So here we are. So what do we mean by forest kindergarten? Well, we're really aware that this term has actually come out of often a European model, with this notion that the play happens in the outdoors and that this outdoor setting is being offered to children often for the whole week. So they're not just there for a short period of time, they're there for a long period of time. However, the model that we've been working with is a model that's come out of Scotland and actually came out originally from the Forestry Commission in Scotland, along with some consultants, one of whom is Juliet Robertson, who actually realised that there was a real need to make nature play accessible to many more people, and in particular to the early years, which is where the focus is in this approach. So what we're introducing you to is a new, it's an old idea, but a new spin on a model, which is known and will be increasingly known as Forest Kindergarten Local Nature Space. And this has also been developed with a working group in England and Wales with the collaboration of Scotland to find something that we think will really increase access for the early years into the outdoors. So we're talking about, well, what is nature? We're talking about nature being a park, a field, a beach, a woodland, and a forest. Now, we understand it's called forest kindergarten, and this is often true with even forest schools, but it's just, in a way, it's what has been taken by people. People understand that term. So we're using forest kindergarten, but understanding that it's actually about playing in nature in the widest possible sense. And we're also saying that actually, as a starting point, people may only have the expertise and the comfort and the ability to take children out, once a week or as in short periods of time. And what we hope is that the more that people become familiar with this model, that they will increase their practice to immerse children as for fully in the natural world, but we're starting here. So that's kind of what we mean by forest kindergarten. Now, we see this directly to meet the needs of early years professionals as part of their regular provision for learning in the early years. But what is it that a space needs to have? And we've spent a while thinking about this, but we really think that if you're going to think about a local space, that it's really the last sentence in bold to consider, which is about enabling children, a space that enables children to freely engage, to be able to explore and play, and has enough that actually children can influence it, can change it in some ways. They can act upon it. So something to consider when you're thinking about, well, where can I take children? So it was kind of in the discussion with the working group, it's not really just a pavement. It needs to be a safe enough container where they can explore, but it doesn't actually need to be that big, surprisingly. So over to you, Louise.
Okay, so we're just going to spend a few moments just talking about good early years practice, because we hear that term a lot, and it's what does it really mean? Well, it means the same whether it's inside or outside. So there's two core elements really within the early years. So the first being that to nurture the individual and unique child. And then the second is looking at developing positive relationships and building trust between caregivers or children and practitioners. And if we really start to really consider that the child is at the heart, and if they feel valued and understood, and the adults around them are creating a safe place, whether it's inside or outside, where children can really fully immerse in play, be fascinated with the world around them, and have the freedom to explore, which obviously the outside does offer huge amounts, using all their senses, then they will learn and develop. So that's really the three pictures in the middle, looking at the unique child, the positive relationships, and then as the outcome, learning and development. And I feel passionately that playful, exploratory learning, which connects all the senses and engages the whole body, really should underpin everything that we do within the early years. So we're now going to look at exploring the power of play. So I want you just to take a moment, have a think, put your sort of self in the role of a child and think about opening up a book and seeing a picture of a cake. And that's the first image that you see on the slide on the left-hand side, an image of a cake. Yours could be something else. You might have a lemon. Just think of a bit of food and you don't know what it is. So every bit of learning tells a story. So if I was a child and I saw a picture of a cake, and I didn't know what it was, I would start to learn little bits about it. So I would learn maybe that it's round and that it might look different inside. I wouldn't necessarily be able to verbalize it, and I'd probably not stay interested in the picture for too long. So then if I moved to picking up an object of a toy cake, whether it's plastic or wooden, what would I learn from that now? So I'd probably learn that it has different colours on it. I might start to realise the size perspective of the cake. If it was modelled to me, I'd probably realise that you can cut it and that it was food, because if it was modelled and that people are putting it to their mouths, I would start to realise that it's something that you can eat. And then the last picture, the picture on the right, is of a child having a full experience of what a cake is. So what would you learn from that? Well, you'd learn that it's soft and it's bouncy and you can plunge your fingers in, and it's crumbly and squidgy and it's gooey inside, and you'd probably eat it and get a bit messy, and you'd taste all the flavors that were in there. So you'd have a completely different experience. So when we're thinking about a child's brain or an adult's brain, the brain works like a muscle. So if it's not stimulated, your brain gets bored, you get frustrated and probably a bit lethargic. Whereas through playful experiences like the little child with the cake, the brain is being exercised, it's fully engaged, it's challenged, and it's making connections all the time to what sensory feedback it's having, and it's starting to make sense of the world. So by giving children real life experiences means that children become more engaged and involved, and they've got greater interaction, which means that there are greater learning opportunities. So when we're thinking about, we will move this into the outside in a minute, and thinking about what the outside means for children and the sensory play experiences that they can get from that. Okay, next slide, please.
So let's always remember that we are actually developing the whole of ourselves. So to be alive is to have all these aspects. And sometimes what we see is these, this idea of being the holistic, being a circle. But actually somebody recently said we're like diamonds with these like multifaceted parts to us. And some are really unpolished and unused, and some are clearer. And actually part of the whole of life is developing these different facets and beginning to notice areas that you perhaps haven't developed. So that's as true for a child as it is for an adult. And then we can ask the question, so how does nature actually promote us in developing these aspects of who we are? And we could spend a long time exploring that. What's the role of nature in our own personal development, in our own communication development, in our emotional development, in self-care, creativity? Physical skills is an easy one to understand because we know that we use big movements and small movements to look at insects, and we climb trees. We use very different parts of our body. So one of the skills that we need to develop and would develop in a training is, how do we observe children and actually draw out some of those skills, and how do we support them to actually have a wider range of possibility of who they are? That just gets us going to the next one.
Okay, so moving this idea into the outdoors now, and thinking, why is nature play so valuable and what does it offer our children? So when you go outside, there's an abundance of sensory experiences. I always think of nature as being in a sensory explosion, and the environment is always changing. There's been a huge amount of research over a period of time that has looked at children, and children particularly who have had regular experiences in nature, and the outcome of that showed that children who have been in nature regularly are happier, are relaxed, they start to learn at their pace and go with their interests more. They use all of their senses. They get mucky, and that's okay, and they start to direct their learning. And because it's such an exciting and fascinating environment, they often show higher levels of attention and focus. So if we look for a moment, the child that's going up the log, that child will be getting sensory feedback the whole time they're on the log. That log will be different on different days because, as I've already mentioned, we know that the environment is always changing. So if you think of that child going up the log on a dry day, it will be far easier than going up on a day when it's a bit slippery, a bit wet, a bit frosty. So each time a child has an experience like that, they'll be sort of internalizing that and regulating and managing their own risks. Now, those skills that they are picking up through having those experiences can then be transferred to any environment that they go to. They'll have had that real life experience and they'll take it with them wherever they go. It's very different than looking at a photograph of a wet, slippery day. So the other element, if we move to the next slide, is and this is something that the Forest Kindergarten approach really, really embeds throughout it, is developing regular experiences for children and developing a sense of place and a sense of belonging. So developing a sense of space for the unique child in a nature space. If you think about your experiences as a child and maybe think back to something that really you remember, and that you loved exploring, then probably it was to do with the reason why it's meant something to you is that you've had an emotional attachment to it. So these don't just happen by having one experience of it. It happens over time. And what the Forest Kindergarten approach really has underpinning it is that as you have all these development of sense of place, develops a ripple effect. And the ripple effect means that children that have had a really positive experience in nature regularly, they then start to want to take their family and their friends out to the same places within their local area. And obviously that's brilliant because it gets more people accessing the amazing world that we have and that we live in, and sometimes can be overlooked. So it teaches us it allows us to appreciate the world around us.
Okay, so I'm hoping that you would have heard of David Sabel. He is an American, I think he calls himself a place-based educator. And he has spent many years observing children and nature. And he observed that regardless of background, socio-economic status, ethnicity, or even ecosystem, even the ecosystem that the children found themselves in, he would continually observe children playing in certain ways. There'd be typical ways. He called them either play motifs or play themes. One of the reasons why we wanted to just introduce that, if you're not familiar with that today, is because often as practitioners, we carry loads with us. We think we need to have lots of resources to actually support this approach, this play and development and learning approach, when in fact, if we create this container in a natural environment, children will naturally start showing these particular themes. So some of the themes he came up with sort of 7 themes, as you can see here, like special places. So you always see children making little dens and all sorts of different ways of creating a home. You'll see them doing lots of hunting and gathering and wanting to collect and treasure hunts and so on. And of course, everything here can be built on. They can be, you can take one experience and build on them and increase skills with that. Map making and following paths, going on a wander and exploring. You also find that children will either behave like animals, crawling around like animals, or role-playing an animal, or hiding like an animal, or reaching out and having that empathetic relationship with an animal. Some children that I work with will prefer to be with animals than humans. And this whole idea of constructing adventures, so that can look in so many different ways. So you'll notice this when you're outdoors working with children. And of course, that whole idea of fantasy play and stories and so on. And then Professor Jan White, based in England, actually considered his work, considered Appleton's work, Pello's work, and actually thought that there needed to be an additional 2 themes that she and others had observed. So we've now come up with 8 themes. You would have thought that 6 plus 2 would be, that's 8. Sorry for my maths. But the most important thing is that she also observed that children actually enjoy rituals and celebrations. So they'll create little ceremonies, or they'll pretend that they're being married, or all sorts of little ways of creating rituals that actually center them and connect them. And then the other thing is this idea of prospect, that children will often like to get up high, whether that's a tree house or so on. So these are the themes that we might observe in a forest kindergarten. And then we can apply, if we choose to, apply the curriculum that we might be working within to the things that we observe. So we could be here for a long time looking at different play types. We know that play is how children learn. I actually think it's how adults learn, but we don't take it as serious as perhaps we should. So Bob Hughes is one of the kind of grandfathers of play, and my understanding is that a lot of his wisdom came out of the adventure playground movement, which is very old, certainly in England. And he also actually started to talk about all these different kinds of play. And this lovely picture comes from Caitlin Gann's, if you haven't heard of her, Forest Schooled, fantastic blog and book. Just gives you an idea of the sorts of play that we might experience children doing in nature. So we have this idea of fantasy play, as we talked about earlier, or imaginative play, where children will tie a string to a log and imagine it's their dog, or creative play, the never-ending possibility of nature materials for creativity. That whole rough and tumble that's so important in figuring out where I end and where the other begins. So much research is being shown that a lot of young adults end up in the criminal system, and they can trace it back because they weren't allowed to play, to get a sense of their physicality. And it goes on. Symbolic play, which again, I mean, Louise does a lot of work with narrative and story and the importance of story within children's learning and development. So we wanted to give you one example of just taking one simple natural material like a stone. And in England, we have, these are sort of the areas of our curriculum, early years curriculum, and you can take a stone and you can apply it to the curriculum, starting with the child's interests and their own play. So a stone, if you want to take maths, for example, you might have a physical sense of how much a stone actually weighs. We often think in our community of practitioners that how can we learn when things are so conceptual? We actually need to have an embodied sense of what weight means. You know, we can't understand what it means unless we have it in our bodies first. So, for example, maths, yes, we might sort the stones into shiny stones, rough stones, small stones, big stones, and I can almost hear Louise going, well, isn't that language? Isn't that all about language development and extending the language just from looking at a stone and having an interesting discussion without interfering, adulterating the play, perhaps. So we can take this in all different areas of the curriculum. We were having a little conversation before we went online about chuckies. I wasn't familiar really with that term, but the idea that we could have a stone and put it in a place in front of a group of children, and they have their stones and they have to hit that stone. And actually we could sit and think, well, what physical development are we supporting through a game? And chances are they'll come up with those games anyway. But we were saying that they would have to take, you know, that would be thinking about risk, because if they throw it in the wrong direction, they might hurt somebody. Also, that whole kind of distance, measuring distance, accuracy, all sorts of different ways that we might think about that physical development. I mean, I don't know if you've heard of green gym, people carrying stones and going on runs and things like that. We do a little game with that if we wanted to, and on it goes. And actually, well, in the training, we also look at all natural materials and where the learning can be gained from simple natural materials. So I hope that you've had a little chance to read some of that, but as I said, you'll get the slides anyway, so you can have a little longer to absorb some of those points. So I think we'll move on.
So the next few slides, we're just going to talk a little bit about the Forest Kindergarten local nature play training that Circle of Life offer as one of the training courses. So within the local nature play training, these are the three core elements that run throughout the 2-day or 3-day course, and we're going to just pick each of them and just go through them so you can see what the coverage is of those 3 areas. So the first one, we go to the next slide. So the first one around pedagogy. So this obviously underpins everything to do with the training. So we look at the benefits of child play. We would look at child development and how the outdoors can support this. And we look at the universal rights of the child to play, to have healthy living, to have access to nature, and also to have to be part of the world. The second element, which is looking at people, so that really this area really helps to support practitioners to feel and to build and feel confident and empowered as practitioners to start to take children outside regularly, maybe off-site, focusing on developing routines with children, preparing children before you go, working with parents and other adults that may be coming with them. And that's really a really good part of the training, to make sure that everybody feels confident and supported when taking children off site. And the third area, which is looking at place, so this sort of looks at how to find and prepare for a suitable site, looking at the site and thinking of, and appraising it, looking at risks and the benefits of the risk, and looking at the safety aspects with children as well, and thinking about how children can start to be sort of a part of making choices at the site. So ultimately, the training really wants to ensure that any adult taking children, some of the youngest children outside, feels comfortable and confident when taking children off site. So within the training, the core themes that sort of run through, and it's all practical and it's all fun and it's all outdoors. So we would look at routines and rituals. So that's thinking about how you gather young children back together, how you travel to the site, how you prepare to take children there and ensure that they feel comfortable even before they've left their setting. Looking at how to make sure a site is safe. And some of that can be done through songs, and songs will run throughout. So it might be counting the children, it might be gathering them back together to share something, it might be a weather song. So songs and games are quite, anybody that comes on the training leaves the training with a sort of a huge repertoire of games for boundaries and health and safety, as well as good songs that you can use. The health and safety aspect is just worth mentioning, because within the training, we sort of ask for any worries that people might have about taking children off site, and they usually involve hand washing and toileting, but also we covered what happens if a dog runs onto the site when you've got young children there, and what do you do around looking for dog poo and things. So it's quite a thorough training in terms of making sure that when you're taking children off site, that it's fun, and all of these can be covered through fun games and songs, but that people feel reassured to take children off site.
Great.
So really, this is the last sort of thought before I hand back to Marina, and she'll talk to you a little bit about some of the training opportunities. So if the routines and rituals allow children to feel safe and secure in nature, then children will feel that they have the freedom to become directors of their learning, to play and explore fully. And the role and skill of the practitioner, and it's the same in the classroom, whether an outside classroom or an inside classroom, the role and skill of any practitioner is to support and enhance playful opportunities. And that's when, if I just link back to what Marina was saying a little while ago, that's looking at the possible lines of development and how you can take their interests and challenge it or pop a little thought in and step back again. So that's a real role and skill of a practitioner, and that is, we do cover that on the training and allow time for people to have a think about how their role can support play.
Thank you. Thanks, Louise. I have asked in the chat if you do have any questions. It might be good to pop a few in there, because we're going to have about 10 minutes or so for some questions. I know Sue Harrison, I can see you put something in there already. But before we go to the questions, so what is this new Forest Kindergarten local nature play training? Well, at the moment, it's a 2-day training for early years practitioners. As we've been saying, it's really about enabling early years practitioners to actually take their groups outdoors and to do all the learning and play in the outdoors. We're not suggesting that this is the full immersion Forest Kindergarten. We really understand and hope and wish that children can get as much immersion as possible, but in reality, for a lot of people, we need to start with where people are at, which might be, we hope, at least once a week, if not several times a week. So we want to enable you within your setting to really to be able to feel confident to take your children outdoors. We want to really equip you with the benefits for young children. There's a whole manual that goes alongside the training that really gives you the key resources you need alongside all the benefits of actually working outdoors. And actually we explore some of that research, because it's often quite surprising what the research is telling us. We really also feel there's a community aspect that actually being able to take children into your local area is also about building that relationship with place, which is why I love David Sabell's work. He really talks about the importance of the community and, you know, waving to the person along the street or saying hi to the little dog, and just the little local shops, being part of the whole learning experience, as well as accessing and getting to know those nature places. So it's been a really interesting COVID time. We're going to address some of the questions around COVID in a minute. But in particular, because there's been a working group that's actually really wanted to take this 2-day training and make it into a qualification. So we're hoping in England and Wales within the next few months, certainly by early 2021, that there will be a qualification. And actually what that means from our point of view is it becomes a 3-day training, and actually we add in an observation element. And of course, with any qualification, you end up having to write down, you know, answers in a workbook as such. But that's in the pipeline. Scotland already offers the qualification based on this approach. In the meantime, we're offering a 2-day non-qualification, but actually covers pretty much all of the ground, as I said, alongside a manual. So there's lots to talk about with the potential, I think, of working in the outdoors, but we wanted to leave you just without, of course, we're going to tell you about what we're actually doing. So we've actually just got one training booked in the outdoors in Sussex, England, on the 22nd of October and the 4th of October. But we also really would be very happy to share people that can offer this around the country and in Wales. And please stay in touch to find out more. Now, just a quick one on how to access the training in Scotland. What I would be saying is look up Forest Kindergarten Scotland, and the SQA is the qualification body that's doing that. So please look at that. There are key people in Scotland to know about are Juliet Robertson, who actually we wouldn't be here without her delivering this training, but also in her own, well, she's supported the qualification and offers what's called Wee Green Spaces, which is in a way the equivalent of the 2-day training that we're offering down here in this part of the country. So what I would say is, when are you coming to Dublin? Well, we work in Dublin, so we'll be seeing you soon as we can get there. But in terms of COVID, I really want to assure you that a number of us are already back in the outdoors working with groups. Now, of course, we have to follow guidelines. In practice, the research shows that young children are very unlikely to get infected. But that aside, obviously the school system is working with pods, the pod system of groups that are staying together. Practically, yes, we have risk benefit assessments that are responding to COVID. And what that really looks like is actually making sure that people have good hygiene. And as Juliet would say, it's actually part of practice anyway, isn't it? That we're teaching our young children to have good hygiene. If you haven't looked up tippy tappies, we've been using them for many years, but actually if you put in the internet tippy tappies, there's a lovely little thing of how to make a tippy tappy, and that's simply a very simple wood structure with a simple container that you can you make a little pedal. Sounds complicated, isn't complicated, and water comes out and you can wash your hands. And you can decide that people bring their towels in their little bags, their little rucksacks, they bring their snacks. So there's certain ways of limiting infection in the outdoors. Some people are putting little masks on if they're getting close, doing some soaring. Some people aren't doing that. But on the whole, I think there's a which is totally understandable. Before I got back outdoors, I was worried that as soon as you actually step back into a natural setting, you can really see how it's more than doable to work outdoors with COVID. And as we know, really the next forever, I would imagine, outdoors is going to be safer. So, but it's not just about safety, it's about really top quality learning and really providing the opportunity for the learning aspect of play, but also really that well-being of play, because more than ever, what we haven't talked about is how play really enables people to discharge feelings, to work out feelings, to express themselves in a way that they can't do when they're indoors. And I'm surprised that we're not all doing it as part of our training, and I look forward to a time when we are. So is there any funding for training? And not at the moment, but we, as an organisation, 50% of what we do is funded. We are looking at funded program, developing funded programs. So we will be doing that. It's not so easy at the moment. What am I missing? Do you need to be qualified early years practitioner? Louise, do you want to just say where we're at with that?
So for the qualification, we have stated that you would be need to be an early years practitioner to do the training. Depending on the 2-day training, I think if you've got a real interest and you want to come and experience the forest kindergarten training, I wouldn't have thought there's any rules to say that you couldn't come on the training at all. But for the qualification, we're putting it forward that you would need to be an early years practitioner. Would you think?
Is there a level difference, do you think, with the access?
I mean, I think we've said level 2 or level 3, haven't we, to access the training. I think everybody that's attended the training so far has been an early years practitioner and has been working within a setting. And they have said that it's obviously, as soon as they go back into their setting, they're starting to put some of the things that they've practiced into effect. So I think ideally, it would benefit you if you're working in an early years environment.
From where we're at right now, and I'm sorry if I landed that one on you, Louise, but what we know within the forest school qualification is that, and this will be taken somewhat out of our hands. So as it becomes a qualification, that's going to be looked at in depth, whether there will be an equivalent experience, what will be needed in order to attend it. So there is a certain hesitation there to give you the full facts, but the actual 2-day course, you are able to come as somebody that is interested in early years practice. Yeah, I think that's good. So what if your forest school's trained? I think that would also be acceptable. But in terms of the qualification, as I said, it will need to go through the official kind of routes to identify what is needed to do a level 3 qualification.
Can I just add, we have had some people that have come on the training already that are forest school trained, but don't normally work with early years children. So they have come on the training to sort of understand more about the approaches of play, and because it's very different. It's not different, but it's there's a lot of pedagogy covered with how young children learn and the importance of play, especially. So even if you're forest school trained, I think there is, the approaches can sometimes be different.
Yeah, certainly that's what came out of the thinking in Scotland, that whilst forest school training is excellent, I mean, I'm a forest school trainer, it isn't always applicable just to the early years. And actually, of course, where we're coming from is, if you have the background in early years, what you need is to know how to take children outdoors and to observe the learning in that context and be able to bring that back into your setting. You don't need to learn about child development per se, because you've already done that in your training. So I think this is where it really is important that we encourage people who are early years practitioners to come on the training, so that they can then take their training and add nature to as a medium for learning and play. That's the intention. So thank you very, very much, everybody. I'm really glad you could join us, and I hope to see you in the woods, and I hope that you find a way to take more and more of your practice into nature. And yeah, thanks very much. And you'll get, for a part of signing up, you'll get the slides, and very happy to have an email. Someone's asked for literature. I actually have lots of resources on literature. I can't give you, I should have had all my books here now, but David Sabel is a very good place to start. So I would recommend him reading, and also Jan White, obviously Muddy Faces has a lot of resources if you're not familiar with that as a resource. So thank you, everybody. Thank you. Can
I just add, someone's also asked about the cost. If you go on to Circle of Life website, all the details of the next training is up there with the costs. Yes,
it's £175 for 2 days training. Okay, many, many thanks. Keep well, everybody. And I'm going to try and sign off from Webinar Jam. We're going back here, and many, many thanks. Bye.
Bye.